Veldar's fingers gripped the control stick as his ship spun wildly through space. Red warning lights flashed across his cockpit, while alarms screamed in his ears. The Vex-High had torn through his battle group like paper, leaving only burning metal and silence behind. His ship's hull groaned under the stress as he fought to reach the nearest planet. The Corvani warrior had seen many battles in his 30 years of service. He knew when to fight and when to run. His people had learned this lesson well over thousands of years. Those who stayed to fight hopeless battles became history. Those who lived to fight another day became legends. But today, there would be no glorious retreat. His ship broke apart as it hit the atmosphere of Kepler 442b. Veldar barely made it to his escape pod before the main hull exploded into a ball of fire above him. The small pod bounced and rolled across the rocky ground, throwing him against the walls until everything went black. When he woke up, pain shot through his left arm and chest. Burns covered his dark blue skin where his armor had melted. The pod's emergency supplies gave him water and basic medical foam, but he knew he was in serious trouble. His radio was dead. His ship was scattered across miles of desert. And according to his datapad, this world was right in the path of the Vex-High swarm. Veldar had fought the Vex-High before. They were not like other enemies. Most species fought for territory, resources, or honor. The Vex-High fought to consume. They turned entire worlds into feeding grounds, leaving nothing but empty husks behind. They never stopped, never retreated, never showed mercy. He limped away from his crashed pod, looking for shelter. The landscape was mostly red rock and sparse vegetation. 2 suns hung in the pale sky, making the air shimmer with heat. In the distance, he could see the smoke from what looked like a human settlement. Humans! Veldar had heard stories about them. They were a young species, only recently joined the galactic community. Most older races saw them as reckless and unpredictable. The Corvani military reports described them as decent fighters, but prone to emotional decisions. They often fought battles they should have avoided and held positions they should have abandoned. 3 hours after crash, Veldar heard the sound of engines approaching. He hid behind a large boulder, his hand on his sidearm. A human patrol vehicle appeared over a ridge, kicking up clouds of dust. 2 humans in military gear climbed out and walked toward his hiding spot. "We know you're there," called one of them in accented galactic standard. "We saw your ship come down. Are you injured?" Veldar hesitated. He could try to fight, but he was wounded and outnumbered. He could try to run, but his leg was hurt and they had a vehicle. Slowly, he stepped out from behind the rock with his hands visible. The lead human was young, maybe 25 standard years. His name tag read Hyunwoo, and he wore lieutenant's stripes. Instead of pointing weapons at him, the human approached with a medical kit and a water container. "You're Corvani," Hyunwoo said, offering the water. "We've been expecting refugees from the Outer Rim battles. The Vex-High are pushing everyone back." Veldar drank the water gratefully. It tasted better than anything he had ever consumed. "Why are you helping me? We could be enemies." "Could be," agreed Hyunwoo. "But right now you're just hurt and thirsty." They loaded him into their vehicle and drove back to the human base. Along the way, Veldar studied his captors. They seemed relaxed, even friendly. The driver hummed a tune while Hyunwoo checked his medical scanner. This was not how prisoners were usually treated. The human base sat in a valley surrounded by red cliffs. It was smaller than Veldar expected, with maybe 200 soldiers. The defensive walls looked hastily built, and many of the weapons appeared to be salvaged from different sources. For a species preparing to face the Vex-High, they seemed remarkably unprepared. They brought him to a medical tent where a human woman began treating his burns. Her name was Sunmi, and she worked with gentle efficiency. While she applied healing gel to his wounds, she talked about the tactical situation. "We've heard about your tactical expertise," Sunmi said as she bandaged his arm. "The Vex-High will be here in 72 hours. Our intelligence says they're bringing at least 50,000 bio-warriors." Veldar stared at her. 50,000? How many defenders do you have?" 237, she replied calmly. Before Veldar could respond to this impossible situation, another human entered the tent. This one wore captain's insignia and had the bearing of a veteran commander. His name tag read Jin-Ho. "Welcome to Forward Base Charlie," Jin-Ho said. "We could use your knowledge of Vex High attack patterns. In exchange, we'll get you off-world when this is over." Veldar studied the captain's face, looking for signs of deception or madness. He found neither. Jin-Ho seemed completely serious about defending this position against overwhelming odds. "You realize your position here is hopeless?" Veldar said. "Any rational commander would have evacuated already. 200 soldiers cannot stop 50,000 Vex High." Jin-Ho smiled, but there was no humor in it. "Maybe you're right, but we're not leaving until every civilian transport clears the system." "How many civilians?" 40,000, including families, children, elderly. They need 72 hours to reach the jump point. Veldar felt something cold settle in his stomach. These humans were planning to sacrifice themselves for people they might never see again. The next morning, Veldar walked around the human base with growing confusion. Everything he saw went against basic military training. The base sat at the bottom of a valley like a target in a shooting range. The Vex High would have the high ground from 3 directions. Any competent commander would have built on the ridges above, not down in this trap. Sergeant Timin acted as his guide, a stocky human with graying hair and laugh lines around his eyes. He pointed out their defensive positions with the enthusiasm of someone showing off a prize garden. "See that machine gun nest?" Timin said, gesturing toward a sandbag position. "Perfect view of the main approach. And over there, Corporal Eugene spent 2 days burying mines and setting up hidden explosives. The bugs won't know what hit them." Veldar examined the position through his field glasses. The machine gun had a good field of fire, but it was also completely exposed to counterattack. "That position will last maybe 10 minutes once the Vex High spot it." "Maybe," Taemin agreed cheerfully, "but it'll be a hell of a 10 minutes. They walked to the ammunition depot next. Veldar had seen Corvani supply bases that could support a division for months. This human stockpile looked like it might last a single company for a few days. He counted the boxes and did quick calculations in his head. "Your ammunition stores won't last 6 hours against a full Vex High assault," he told Taemin. A young woman working nearby looked up from cleaning an old rifle. Her uniform said "So Young," and she couldn't have been older than 20 standard years. The weapon in her hands had obviously seen many battles. Parts of it had been welded together, and the stock was held on with metal wire. "Then we'll make every shot count," So Young said with a smile. She went back to her work, humming a soft melody while she cleaned each component with loving care. Veldar stared at her. She was talking about dying, and she was humming like someone preparing for a picnic. The tour continued to the medical bay, communication center, and vehicle park. Everything was the same story. Too few supplies, too few people, too little time. Yet every human he met seemed confident and focused. They reinforced positions that any military manual would call hopeless. They maintained equipment that should have been scrapped years ago. They planned tactics for a battle they could not possibly win. That evening, Veldar sat with a group of Marines around one of their small heating units. The humans shared their rations without complaint, even though supplies were clearly limited. Someone had managed to cook something that almost tasted like food, and they passed it around in dented metal cups. The conversation was light and friendly. They told jokes about their officers, complained about the weather, and shared stories about home. A private named Donghyun showed pictures of his girlfriend back on Earth. Another Marine called Min Esyo talked about the fishing boat he wanted to buy after his service ended. None of them mentioned the 50,000 Vex High coming their way. Veldar had been in many military units over the years. He knew what soldiers talked about before hopeless battles. They wrote letters home. They made peace with their gods. They talked about death and honor and sacrifice. These humans acted like they were on a routine training exercise. "How can you be so calm?" he finally asked the group. "You know what's coming. You know the odds." The Marines looked at each other. Private So Young, still cleaning that ancient rifle, spoke first. "Fear doesn't help anyone," she said simply. "We do our jobs. We look after each other, and we trust the plan." "What plan?" Veldar asked. You're outnumbered 200 to 1. The plan is to buy time, said Corporal Eugene, a thin man with quick hands and intelligent eyes. 72 hours. That's all the civilians need to reach the jump point. And then what happens to you? The humans exchanged glances again. This time it was Sergeant Timin who answered. Then we did our job. Later that night, Veldar found Medic Sunmi checking supplies in the medical tent. She worked by the light of a small lamp, counting bandages and medicine containers. Her movements were precise and efficient, like someone who had done this many times before. Can I ask you something? Veldar said. Sunmi looked up from her work. Of course. Earlier you seemed confident about this battle, but you must know how it will end. How can you stay so positive? Sunmi was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small personal device. The screen showed a picture of a young boy with her same dark eyes and bright smile. He was wearing a school uniform and holding what looked like a model spaceship. My son's on the last evacuation transport, she said quietly. He's 8 years old and wants to be a Marine like his mom. He builds model ships and dreams about exploring the galaxy. She touched the screen gently, as if she could reach through it and touch his face. These 72 hours aren't about winning or losing, Sunmi continued. They're about making sure he gets that chance, that he grows up free to choose his own path. Veldar looked at the picture again. The boy's smile was exactly like his mother's. You're fighting for one child? I'm fighting for 40,000 people, Sunmi corrected. But yes, mostly for him. She put the device away and went back to counting medical supplies, humming the same soft tune Private, so young, had been singing earlier. The ground shook at dawn on the second day. Veldar felt the vibration through his boots before he heard the sound. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder that never stopped. Then came the chittering. The Vexhai announced their arrival with a noise that made Veldar's skin crawl. Thousands of voices screaming and clicking together in perfect harmony. It was the sound of hunger given voice. The sound of death approaching with many legs. He grabbed his field glasses and climbed to the highest observation post. What he saw on the horizon made his blood turn cold. The Vexhai swarm moved like a living carpet across the red landscape. Bio-warriors the size of ground cars scuttled forward on 6 legs each. Flying scouts buzzed overhead in dark clouds. Behind them came the heavy assault forms, creatures that could punch through tank armor with their claws. First contact in 10 minutes, reported Lieutenant Hyunwoo over the radio. His voice was steady and professional, as if he was announcing the weather. Veldar watched the humans take their positions. Private Junho manned the forward observation post, a danger spot that would be hit first and hardest. The young Marine checked his rifle one last time and settled into his sandbag position. He looked calm, almost peaceful. The first wave hit, like a natural disaster. Vexhai bio-warriors swarmed over the outer defenses, their acid spit melting through metal and stone. The hidden mines that Corporal Eugene had planted exploded in sequence, sending pieces of alien creatures flying through the air. But for every Vexhai that died, 2 more took its place. Private Junho's position took the worst of it. Veldar watched through his field glasses as acid projectiles struck the young Marine's cover. The bioacid ate through his armor like it was made of paper. Green smoke rose from the dissolving metal, and Junho cried out in pain. Any sane soldier would have retreated. Any trained warrior would have fallen back to the secondary positions. Junho stayed right where he was. Artillery request, Grid 77 Alpha. Junho called into his radio, his voice tight with pain. Enemy concentration, moving up the eastern slope. I have visual on the target. More acid struck his position. Veldar could see the Marine's left arm hanging useless at his side, but he continued calling in coordinates for the big guns positioned behind the base. Shell after shell landed exactly where Junho directed them, turning advancing Vexhai into smoking craters. Get out of there, Lieutenant Hyunwoo shouted over the radio. Fall back to line 2. Negative, sir, Junho replied. I can still see them coming. Adjusting fire, target moving northwest. It took 3 Marines to drag him out of that position. Corporal Minesio and 2 others ran across open ground under heavy fire, grabbed their wounded comrade, and carried him back to safety. By then, Junho had passed out from the pain, but his fire direction had stopped an entire company of HFY from reaching the main base. During a brief lull between attacks, Veldar found Lieutenant Hyunwoo coordinating the next offensive line. The human officer had a cut across his forehead, and his uniform was torn, but he worked with focused intensity. Why didn't he retreat when wounded? Veldar asked, gesturing toward the medical tent where Junho was being treated. Hyunwoo looked up from his tactical display. Because his squad was counting on him. His squad would have understood. Any reasonable commander would have ordered him back. Maybe, Hyunwoo said, but Junho knew something we didn't. He could see exactly where the enemy was massing for their next attack. Without his spotting, we would have lost the eastern approach entirely. The second wave came an hour later, bigger and more organized than the first. This time the HFY had learned from their mistakes. They avoided the known minefields and concentrated their assault on the weakest points in the human defenses. Veldar watched the humans respond with tactics that defied everything he had learned about warfare. When ammunition ran low at the northern gun position, instead of rationing what they had left, the Marines started making bombs from maintenance supplies. They took fuel cells, welding equipment, and even cleaning chemicals, turning them into improvised explosives. Private Soyoung, still carrying that ancient rifle, led a team that rigged the base's main generator to explode if the HFY overran their position. "If we're going down," she told Veldar with a grin, "we're taking as many of them with us as possible." The worst moment came in the afternoon when the HFY broke through the outer perimeter entirely. Veldar expected the humans to fall back to their prepared secondary positions, regrouping for a more organized defense. Instead, Squad leader Dong-hyun gathered every available Marine and launched a counterattack straight into the enemy breakthrough. "This is insane," Veldar muttered, but he found himself following Dong-hyun's squad as they charged uphill into the teeth of the HFY advance. "We need time to evacuate the wounded," Dong-hyun shouted over the noise of battle. 5 minutes, that's all." The counterattack lasted exactly 5 minutes. When it was over, Dong-hyun's squad had suffered heavy casualties, but they had pushed the HFY back long enough for medical teams to move every wounded Marine to safety. By nightfall, the humans had lost 30% of their force. The base perimeter had been pushed back on 3 sides. Their ammunition was running dangerously low, and their heavy weapons were either destroyed or damaged. But the HFY had paid a terrible price for every meter ground. Thousands of alien bodies littered the approaches to the base. The human tactics made no sense from a military standpoint, but they were devastatingly effective at making the enemy bleed for every advance. As Veldar helped medic Sunmi treat the wounded, he began to understand something that had escaped him before. Human tactics weren't designed to preserve force strength or maintain strategic advantages. They were designed to preserve each other. Hour 48 brought a silence that felt worse than the screaming. The HFY had pulled back after their latest assault, but everyone knew they were just regrouping for the final push. The human base looked like a broken toy scattered across the valley floor. Half the defensive walls had collapsed. Smoke rose from burning equipment. Bodies lay covered under torn blankets. Veldar sat in what remained of the communications bunker, checking the charge on his salvaged plasma rifle. The weapon felt familiar in his hands, a reminder of his old life when battles had clear objectives and reasonable odds. Now he was fighting alongside creatures that defied every rule of warfare he had ever learned. Sergeant had one limped over to his position, dragging her wounded leg behind her. Shrapnel from the last attack had torn through her thigh, but she still carried her rifle and radio pack. Blood had soaked through the bandage Sunmi had applied hours ago. "Status report from the eastern sector," she said, settling down beside him with a grunt of pain. "Corporal Eugene's team is down to 3 men, and maybe 200 round between them." "And the western approach?" "Private Soyoung is holding it with a broken rifle and a lot of attitude." Hae-won managed a tired smile. "She's been fixing that gun with spare parts and sheer stubbornness for the last 6 hours." Outside, they could hear the HFY moving in the darkness. The creatures made soft chittering sounds as they repositioned for their next attack. Veldar had fought these aliens enough times to know what the sounds meant. They were bringing up their heavy assault forms, the massive biotanks that could punch through any defense the humans had left. "Your captain is leading you all to death," Veldar said quietly. "This position cannot be held. Even with perfect tactics and unlimited ammunition, we don't have enough people left." Hay-1 checked her weapon's power cell and tested the radio connection to the remaining squads. Her movements were slow and careful, like someone saving energy for one last effort. "Maybe you're right," she said, "but that's not really the point, is it?" She reached up and touched something taped to the side of her helmet. It was a small piece of paper, worn and creased from handling. She carefully peeled it off and showed it to Veldar. The drawing had been made with colored pencils by a child's hand. It showed a spaceship flying between bright yellow stars. Stick figures with smiling faces looked out the windows. At the bottom, careful letters spelled out, "Me and MOM exploring space." "My daughter's transport is in the third evacuation wave," Hay-1 said softly. "She's 12 years old and loves to paint pictures of stars. She wants to be an explorer when she grows up, see all the worlds beyond our solar system." Veldar studied the simple drawing. The child had used every color in her pencil set, filling the space around the ship with swirls of purple and blue and green. "Captain Jinho's son is on the same ship," Hay-1 continued, "along with about 8,000 other people who just want to live their lives in peace. We hold because they need time to reach the jump point." A new sound echoed across the valley, the deep, pulsing roar of Vex-High heavy assault forms moving into position. Veldar had heard that sound in his nightmares for years. It meant the final attack was coming soon. "How much time do they still need?" he asked. 18 hours to reach the jump point safely." Hay-1 carefully taped the drawing back onto her helmet. "After that, they'll be in hyperspace and beyond the reach of the swarm." 18 hours. Veldar looked around at what was left of their defenses, with maybe 60 effective fighters left. 53, actually, Hay-1 corrected. "I just got the latest casualty reports." As if to prove her point, they watched Private Kyung-Soo stumble past their position. The young Marine had been fighting continuously for 16 hours. His armor was cracked in 3 places. His rifle was held together with wire, and he could barely walk in a straight line. "Where are you going?" Hay-1 called out to him. "Volunteering for perimeter patrol," Kyung-Soo replied. "Lieutenant Hyun-woo needs someone to watch the northern approach." "You can barely stand up." Kyung-Soo managed a weak grin. "Good thing the Vex-High don't know that." He continued on his way, weaving slightly but still moving forward. Veldar watched him disappear into the darkness, probably to die alone in some foxhole protecting people he would never meet. Across the base, Medic Sunmi worked by the light of a failing lamp, treating wounded Marines with supplies that had run out hours ago. She had taken shrapnel to her shoulder during the afternoon attack, but her hands remained steady as she cleaned wounds and applied bandages made from torn uniforms. "We should evacuate the wounded," one of the Marines suggested. "Get them to the transport ships." "No room," Sunmi replied without looking up from her work. "Every seat is reserved for civilians. Besides, who would carry them? We need every able body on the defensive line." No one argued with her logic. They all understood the mathematics of their situation. Every person who left the base meant one less rifle to hold back the swarm. Veldar watched these exhausted humans share their last ration bars and ammunition clips without complaint. They divided everything equally, making sure the wounded got their fair portion. When Private Min-Seo found an extra power cell for his rifle, he gave it to Marine next to him whose weapon was almost dead. In that moment, sitting in a destroyed bunker surrounded by the enemy, Veldar realized something that changed everything he thought he knew about warfare. He had never truly understood courage. For most of his life, he had thought courage meant being unafraid in battle. But these humans were terrified. He could see it in their eyes, hear it in their voices, feel it in the way their hands shook when they thought no one was looking. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was a willingness to act despite that fear when others depended on you. The final assault began before the sun cleared the mountains. Veldar woke to the sound of Vex-High war cries echoing off the valley walls, closer and louder than ever before. The creatures had spent the night moving their heavy weapons into position. Now they came with everything they had left. The first bio-warriors reached the inner perimeter, while most of the humans were still grabbing their weapons. Veldar rolled out of his sleeping position and fired his plasma rifle at a creature the size of a small vehicle. The shot burned through its armored shell, but 3 more took its place immediately. All around him, the surviving humans fought with whatever they could find. Private So Young had finally given up trying to repair her ancient rifle and was using it as a club. Sergeant Taemin threw his empty sidearm at a Vex-High scout and drew a combat knife that looked older than he was. The fighting quickly became hand-to-hand combat. The creatures swarmed over the broken walls, faster than the humans could shoot them down. Veldar found himself fighting beside Corporal Changwu, a quiet Marine who had barely spoken during the past 2 days. Changwu had lost his rifle in the first few minutes of fighting. Now he held nothing but a combat knife and a determination that seemed unbreakable. 3 Vex-High bio-warriors tried to get past him to the medical bunker where the wounded sheltered. Changwu killed the first one with a perfect thrust to its brain cluster. He wounded the second badly enough to slow it down. The third one knocked him to the ground with claws that raked across his chest. "Fall back!" Veldar shouted. "You can't hold them all." Changwu struggled to his feet, bleeding from multiple wounds. "Can't let them reach the wounded," he gasped, and threw himself at the third bio-warrior with nothing but that knife. Veldar had seen brave soldiers before, but this was something different. This was a man who would rather die than let his comrades down, even when retreat was the smart choice. The battle compressed into a smaller and smaller area as the Vex-High overran position after position. Soon only the central communications bunker remained in human hands. Maybe 30 Marines were still fighting, most of them wounded, all of them exhausted. Captain Jinho sat at the radio console, with blood running down his face from a head wound. His left arm hung useless at his side, but his right hand worked the controls with steady precision. Around him, the last offenders formed a desperate circle, firing at Vex-High scouts that tried to break through the bunker entrance. "Civilian Transport 7, this is Base Charlie." Jinho spoke into his headset. "What's your status on final evacuation sequence?" The radio crackled with static and distant voices. Veldar could hear the panic in the transport pilot's voice, but also the determination to complete their mission. "Base Charlie, we're loading the last group now. Medical cases and children are aboard. Need 40 more minutes to reach safe jump distance." "Copy that, Transport 7. We'll keep the lights on for you." 40 minutes. Veldar looked around at their situation and tried not to laugh at the impossibility of it all. They had maybe 24 effective fighters left, no ammunition reserves, and an enemy that had been reinforced twice during the night. A Vex-High heavy assault form appeared in the bunker entrance, its bio-cannon charging for a shot that would kill everyone in the room. Private Kyung-Soo, who had been fighting for 20 hours straight, threw himself directly at the creature. He had no weapon except a broken piece of metal pipe, but he jammed it into the bio-cannon's charging chamber just as it fired. The explosion killed both Kyung-Soo and the bio-warrior, but it bought them another few minutes. 38 minutes. Jinho announced calmly, as if he was reading the weather report. The minutes crawled by like hours. Each one cost the Marines they could not afford to lose. Medic Sunmi used her medical supplies to make improvised grenades. Lieutenant Hyunwoo fought with a pistol in each hand until both weapons clicked empty, then picked up rocks and threw them with deadly accuracy. Sergeant Haewon never stopped coordinating defensive fire, even after a Vex-High claw tore open her radio pack. She shouted orders and encouragement until a bioacid projectile burned through her throat and left her unable to speak. Transport 7 to Base Charlie. The radio suddenly crackled to life. "All civilian transports clear. Jump sequence initiated. We are away. I say again, we are away." Veldar expected the humans to cheer or cry with relief, or at least show some sign of celebration. They had done it. They had held the impossible position for the full 72 hours. Instead, he watched Captain Jinho close his eyes and whisper something that might have been a prayer. Around the bunker, exhausted Marines slumped against walls and stared at nothing. Some of them wept, but not with joy. They were crying for friends who would never see home again. 20 minutes later, the sound of human warships filled the air above them. Fresh Marines dropped from the sky in assault pods, bringing heavy weapons and unlimited ammunition. The Vex High, caught between surviving defenders and the new arrivals, broke and fled within hours. As medical ships landed to treat the wounded, Veldar found Captain Jinho sitting alone outside the ruined communications bunker. The human officer was bandaged from head to foot, but he was alive. "I want to join your military," Veldar said without introduction. Jinho looked up surprised. "Why would you want to do that? We're not the strongest species in the galaxy. We're not the smartest or the fastest." Veldar thought about everything he had witnessed over the past 3 days. The impossible courage, the willingness to sacrifice everything for people they might never meet, the refusal to abandon their wounded even when it meant certain death. "No," he agreed, "but you're the only species I've met that fights not just to win, but to ensure others don't lose what matters most to them." Years later, Admiral Veldar would stand before classes of mixed human and alien officers, teaching the lessons he had learned in that valley. His words became famous throughout the integrated fleet. Retreat is not always cowardice, and advance is not always courage. True strength lies in knowing what deserves your unwavering stand and then taking it.